You are still here. That fact lands before anything else does. You don't arrive with relief. You arrive with weight, with the quiet disbelief of having made it through something you didn't know how to survive while you were inside it. There's no celebration in this moment, no sense of victory, just the awareness that you're standing where you thought you might not be. You might feel hollow at first, or heavy, or strangely calm in a way that feels unfamiliar. The intensity has passed, but it hasn't left you untouched. It's more like it moved through you and changed the furniture. Things are still standing, but not in the same places. You notice the silence where panic used to live. You notice the absence of noise more than the presence of peace. There's a tiredness here that doesn't need explanation. The kind that comes after holding on longer than you believed you could. After telling yourself just one more day, and then another, and then another. You didn't stay because you were sure. You stayed because leaving wasn't an option you could reach. Because something in you refused to let go, even when you didn't know why. You may feel confused about how to name this moment. It doesn't feel like hope. It doesn't feel like despair either. It feels suspended, like standing still after a storm, checking what's still attached, what's still working, what's still yours. You're not rushing to make sense of it. You're just noticing that you're upright. There might be shame mixed in, or disbelief, or a quiet question about whether being here means anything at all. You might wonder if staying counts, if surviving without clarity is enough. You might wonder why you're still here, when so much inside you felt ready to stop. But you are here, breathing, aware, present enough to notice the weight of this moment. That matters, even if it doesn't feel meaningful yet. Even if you don't know what comes next, even if all you can say is that you didn't disappear. This is not a conclusion. It's an arrival into the aftermath, into the stillness that follows endurance, into the space where nothing is asking you to explain how you made it or what you plan to do now. You're standing, not because you're strong in the way people talk about strength, but because something in you held on when everything else felt uncertain. You are still here, and for now, that is enough to begin from. You didn't plan to stay this long. That matters. At first, it was just getting through the next hour, then the next day, then another stretch that didn't have a name. You told yourself you were just waiting for things to settle, just giving it time, just holding on until the weight shifted. Staying didn't feel like a choice. It felt like what happened when leaving wasn't possible yet. You learned how to live inside that waiting, how to make it quieter, how to reduce your needs so they wouldn't demand answers you didn't have. You learned how to survive in increments, small promises to yourself, small negotiations with the day. You didn't look too far ahead, because looking ahead asked questions you couldn't afford to answer. There were moments when you wondered how much longer you could keep going. You didn't always ask that question out loud. Sometimes it showed up as exhaustion, sometimes as numbness, sometimes as a strange calm that scared you because it felt like nothing at all. You stayed anyway, not because you were certain, because uncertainty was still easier than letting go completely. You may have blamed yourself for staying, for not being stronger in the way people usually mean it, for not making a decisive move, for not having a clear reason. That staying wasn't passivity, it was endurance. It was waking up again when part of you didn't want to. It was continuing without reassurance that it would get better. You stayed through days that felt repetitive, through nights that stretched longer than they should have, through moments when the only thing you could say was, "Not today." You stayed without a vision of the future, without confidence, without clarity. You stayed because something in you kept choosing presence over absence, even when presence hurt. There is a quiet dignity in that kind of staying. Not the kind that gets recognized, the kind that happens privately, internally. The kind that doesn't come with applause or meaning attached to it. You didn't stay because you believed in a better outcome. You stayed because you were still here. And maybe now, you're only beginning to notice how much that took. How long you lived inside that decision without naming it. How staying became a way of surviving when everything else felt uncertain. It took something out of you. Not all at once, slowly. The cost didn't arrive as crisis. It arrived as erosion, as energy that didn't fully return, as parts of you that learned to stay small so you could keep going. You adapted in ways that were invisible to everyone else, and because they were invisible, they went unacknowledged, even by you. You learned how to move through the days without asking too much of yourself, how to keep expectations low enough to survive them, how to quiet the parts of you that wanted relief or certainty or rest that actually felt like rest. You told yourself this was manageable, that it was temporary, that you could keep paying this price a little longer. Over time, you began to feel thinner inside, not weaker, just worn, like everything required a fraction more effort than it used to. You woke up already bracing. You finished days already depleted. Even moments of calm came with an undercurrent of vigilance, as if peace might disappear if you trusted it too much. There were things you stopped reaching for, not because you didn't want them, but because wanting felt dangerous. It asked for hope. It asked for imagination. And those were things you couldn't afford to lose again. So you narrowed your world. You kept it functional. You focused on staying. Your sense of self shifted quietly. You became the one who endured, the one who managed, the one who didn't ask for more than was available. That identity kept you alive, but it also asked you to leave parts of yourself unattended. Curiosity, ease, the feeling that you could move toward something, not just away from disappearance. You didn't notice the cost right away because nothing collapsed. You were still functioning, still here. That made it harder to name what was happening. You weren't in danger. You were in depletion, the kind that settles in when survival becomes a long-term strategy. And maybe now you can see it without blame, what it required to keep staying, what you set aside to remain present, what slowly thinned as you chose endurance again and again, not because you were wrong to do so, but because even survival over time asks for more than it can give back. It doesn't arrive as hope. It arrives as fatigue that no longer argues. Something in you stops pushing. Not because you've decided anything, not because you've found a new reason. It just becomes harder to keep forcing yourself through each moment the same way you always have. The effort starts to feel inefficient, like spending energy you don't actually have. You notice it in small places, in the pause before you react, in the way your body hesitates before tightening, in the silence you allow to exist without rushing to manage it. These moments are easy to miss. They don't announce themselves. They don't feel important. They just feel different. You don't suddenly want more. You just want less strain, less pressure to endure perfectly, less responsibility for holding everything together inside. The urge to stabilize every feeling weakens. You let things sit longer. You let discomfort pass without chasing it down, not bravely, just quietly. There may be moments when you expect collapse, when you wait for the consequence of not pushing harder. It doesn't come. The ground stays where it is. You're still here. That surprises you more than it should. You're not replacing one strategy with another. You're not choosing a new way forward. You're noticing that some of the old ways are no longer necessary. or no longer possible. The constant alertness dulls, the tight grip loosens slightly, enough to breathe, enough to notice the space you were holding yourself in. This shift doesn't feel like relief at first. It feels unfamiliar. You might even mistrust it, wonder if you're giving up, wonder if this is the beginning of something worse. You've relied on endurance for so long that easing off feels risky. But nothing falls apart. The days keep moving. You keep showing up. You keep existing without performing survival at full volume. That alone changes something. You begin to sense that staying doesn't always require effort, that being here doesn't always demand tension. You're not safer. You're not healed. You're just not bracing every second anymore. And that small change, barely noticeable from the outside, shifts how the weight sits on you. It doesn't remove it. It redistributes it. It makes room for something quieter, something steadier, something that doesn't need you to fight for it to remain. You are still here. And this time, it doesn't feel like something you have to prove. The ground under you is steadier than it was before. Not because everything is resolved, but because you're no longer fighting every moment to stay upright. You're standing in a quieter kind of presence now, one that doesn't demand constant effort, one that allows you to exist without checking whether you're doing it correctly. You haven't left the past behind. It's still with you, carried gently rather than tightly. What you went through hasn't disappeared, but it no longer sits on your chest. It rests beside you, acknowledged without being interrogated. You don't need to turn it into meaning. You don't need to explain how you survived. You're allowed to let the fact of your presence speak for itself. There are still moments when the old reflex appears, when you feel the urge to brace, to hold on harder, to prepare for loss. When that happens, you notice it. You don't punish yourself for it. You don't obey it either. It passes more easily now, like a wave that no longer pulls you under. What's changed is your relationship with staying. You're no longer staying out of desperation. You're staying because you can, because being here doesn't feel like resistance anymore. It feels like allowance, like choosing to remain without having to justify that choice. This place isn't triumphant. It isn't finished. It's quieter than that. It's a place where you can breathe without guarding the breath, where you don't have to narrate your endurance, where existing doesn't require a reason beyond itself. You are still here, not as an achievement, as a fact. And in that fact, something settles, something that doesn't need to be strengthened or explained to be real. You don't have to do anything with this moment. You don't have to decide what it means. This is where things are clear again.